He stood in the back of the crowded hotel lobby, his heart pounding as he watched the news play out on a large screen above the reception desk. Jason had come here for a meeting, a chance to pitch his big idea, but everything had changed in an instant. The room buzzed with chatter, but all he could focus on was the familiar face on the TV. The news anchor, calm and composed, was announcing a breaking story. The words hit him like a hammer. His skin went cold and the chatter around him faded into a haunting silence. He looked around the lobby, searching for familiar faces. Some people were sipping coffee, others were on their phones, completely unaware of the storm brewing. But he could feel their eyes on him, or was it just his imagination, fueled by panic? Moments felt like hours as he tried to process what he had just heard, what was being said about him. His mind raced back to the last few months. He had poured everything into his startup, late nights, countless meetings, and more than a few heartaches. All those sacrifices seemed to slip away as he listened to the anchor detail allegations he couldn't quite wrap his head around. Multiple clients have accused Mr. Misrepresentation, deceit. Those words felt foreign yet so very close. He envisioned his clients, the good people who believed in him, who had placed their trust in his dream. How could they think this about him? Desperation clawed at him, tightening its grip. His hand shook as he reached into his pocket for his phone. The glowing screen felt like a lifeline. He needed to call someone, anyone who could help him make sense of this nightmare. But as he scrolled through his contacts, he hesitated. Would they believe him? Would they understand? Or would they see him as the monster the news was painting? Jason, it's all just a mistake, he mumbled to himself, his voice almost lost in the sea of voices around him. He could almost see the words forming in his mind, a defense he hoped would fall on forgiving ears. Suddenly, a group of people stepped into the lobby, laughing, full of life. Their joy felt like a contrast to the dread that had settled over him like a heavy cloud. Passed by him, oblivious to the turmoil swirling in his heart. One of them glanced at the screen, the laughter fading as he caught the headline. He said to his friends, pointing at the TV. Jason felt as if the ground beneath him had shifted. He couldn't escape the reality that his name had become a topic of conversation, gossip, and judgment. Maybe, just maybe, he could turn this around. He thought of the pitch meeting ahead, the investors waiting for his presentation. Would they care about the accusations? Would they even hear his side, or would they run scared, hiding from someone they presumed was a fraud? He felt a wave of anger rising within him. Anger at the situation, anger at whoever had started this mess. But deep down, he remembered the advice his mentor had given him once. You can't control what others say or think. Taking a deep breath, he clenched his fist and stepped away from the wall. His legs felt unsteady, but he forced himself to walk toward the reception. He could almost hear the ticking clock, each second echoing louder than the last. As he approached the desk, the receptionist's eyes widened when she recognized him. "Mr. Reed, I just saw the news," she stammered. Her sympathy felt like a lifeline, but he couldn't allow himself to sink too deep into that. "It's not true," he said, feeling a spark of determination. "I need to focus on my meeting." The words spilled out, filled with a mix of desperation and hope. She nodded, her expression a mix of support and concern. "Of course," she replied softly. Jason felt a flicker of warmth in the cold atmosphere of the lobby. If he could convince her, maybe it would give him the strength to convince everyone else. He glanced back at the screen, the news still rolling with new accusations, new faces claiming they were duped by him. But the more he watched, the more clarity emerged from the chaos. This was his moment to fight back. His story was still unfolding, and he had the power to change its course. He turned away from the TV and headed toward the conference room, his feet moving faster than his heart. The echo of each step felt like a drumbeat, urging him to keep going. He could still make his pitch work, even amidst the storm. When he entered the room, he found a group of potential investors seated around a polished table. Their eyes flicked toward him, curiosity mixed with hesitation. He had seen their faces before, and he knew what they were thinking. The weight of the news hung in the air like thick fog, ready to swallow him whole. He took a deep breath, planted his feet firmly, and began to speak. "Thank you for being here today," he started, his voice steady despite the chaos brewing inside. "I know you've seen the news, and I know it looks bad." He shared his vision, the hope he had for his company. Each word came from the depths of his heart, fueled by a need for truth. As he spoke, he could see the investors lean in, their expressions shifting from suspicion to intrigue. He could feel the tension ease, the atmosphere thawing as he wove his story with passion and honesty. Jason spoke of his journey, the roadblocks he had faced, and the faith he had in what he was building. "I promise you I have worked tirelessly to make this a success." He watched as their expressions softened, skepticism giving way to curiosity. The silence wasn't judgment anymore, it had become something else, a chance. He could feel them beginning to see the real Jason, the man behind the name televised in judgment. Just as he finished, a couple of the investors exchanged glances. One of them finally asked, his brow furrowed. He could see them contemplating, weighing their decisions. His heart raced, but he remained composed. This was the moment he had to seize. "We all encounter storms, but it's how we weather them that defines us," he continued. "I am here because I believe in my company, and I believe in the people who trust me." Silence enveloped the room, thick as honey. Then a hand shot up. "I like what I hear, Jason." Relief surged through him as the conversation began to flow. They were listening. They wanted to understand, not just hear, but comprehend the full picture of who he was. As the meeting progressed, the weight of the news felt lighter. It was still there, a shadow lurking in the back of his mind. But he was learning to navigate through it, to not let it choke his voice. He could feel his confidence returning piece by piece. Eventually, they wrapped up, and Jason felt like he had shared a small part of himself with them. The investors were intrigued and promised to follow up. As he left the conference room, he could hardly believe what had just happened. He stepped back into the lobby, the TV still playing the same headlines that had once terrified him. But now, the words felt different. He glanced at the screen and took a deep breath. Yes, there was still a fight ahead, challenges to face and reputations to rebuild. But for now, he could see a flicker of hope piercing through the dark clouds, threatening to engulf him. The storm wasn't over, but he was determined to stand his ground. He wouldn't let it define him. With a newfound resolve, he had stepped into the battlefield, ready to reclaim his truth and rise above the noise. Jason Reed was a fighter, and today he had reminded himself of that. He stood in the back of the hotel lobby, a shadow among the bright lights and polished surfaces. Jason had always liked this bustling place. Every corner was filled with laughter, chatter, and opportunity. But today the air felt different, heavy, electric, and tinged with dread. He glanced at the large flat-screen TV above the reception desk. There it was, the flickering image he would never forget, his face plastered across the news as if he were some kind of villain. Words spread like wildfire in his chest, his own breath caught in his throat, lost in a storm of disbelief. He could hear the murmur of voices, but all he could focus on was that headline, cut deep, slicing through the facade he had worked so hard to maintain. Jason felt as if the floor had dropped beneath him, a sinkhole of panic opening wide. Around him, people were busy with their own lives. A couple shared a laugh over lattes, and a group of friends gestured excitedly about a recent trip. But in that moment, Jason felt utterly alone, surrounded by a crowd that might as well have been miles away. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown, a reminder of how quickly everything could unravel. He recalled the last few months, the late nights working on his startup, the sacrifices he had made, the fierce determination that had propelled him forward. All of it, suddenly called into question, seemed to hang like a heavy fog around him. He could almost hear the whispers, the judgments brewing behind him. Was this how easily his dreams could shatter? In a desperate attempt to regain control, he pulled out his phone. The screen seemed too bright, too delicately pinned with notifications. Friends, colleagues, clients, did they all see it? Would they turn their backs on him without hesitation? His fingers hovered over the glass, hesitating to make the call. Would they even listen? Just breathe, Jason, he muttered under his breath, feeling the panic tighten around his chest. In moments like this, fear was a formidable enemy. It could freeze you in place or propel you into a fight. He had to choose wisely. He stood tall, straightened his back, and willed himself to face the chaos. One shake of the head and he turned away from the TV, needing to escape the storm in his mind. As he stepped forward, he saw the receptionist's face, her eyes wide with concern. "Mister," she asked softly. "It's not true," he said, almost too quickly, as if speaking the truth would somehow make it real. He forced a smile, knowing that he had to project confidence, even when his insides felt like a whirlwind. Jason rushed past her, making his way toward the conference room where his meeting was about to begin. He couldn't let this ruin everything. He couldn't allow the backlash of a headline to define him. The conviction surged into his thoughts. Why should he allow this to dictate his fate? Each step felt heavy, but he pressed on, pushing through the fear lining his gut. He opened the door to the conference room, and a wave of relief flooded him as he saw the investors sitting around the table, awaiting his arrival. Their eyes darted toward him, curiosity mingled with uncertainty. "Good afternoon, everyone," he said, gathering himself, but even he could hear the crack in his voice, the uncertainty wrapped in it. As he began his presentation, he could see the misplaced belief in their eyes shift into concern as one of them finally asked, "Have you seen what's going on in the news?" Question hung heavy in the air. Jason felt all eyes on him, waiting for him to crack. He took a second to collect his thoughts. "I want to be transparent with you," he began, gathering courage. "I've worked hard for my company and my reputation." The words flowed through him, a mix of anger and determination. "These accusations are unfounded." He brushed a hand through his hair, trying to keep it together as they leaned in, their expressions shifting from judgment to intrigue. It was a turning point. Jason felt the tension shift in the room. "Let me tell you my story," he continued, weaving in details about his journey, each struggle, each triumph, and the people who had believed in him. He spoke of the late nights spent perfecting his pitch, the countless meetings where he had faced rejection but still persevered. As he spoke, the energy shifted. Questions began to flow. They wanted to understand him, to peel back the layers of fear and doubt. He felt himself rising to the occasion, his passion igniting their interest. "I know it's a lot to take in," he told them, watching their reactions closely, "but I ask for your trust." In that room, he could see the walls of doubt starting to fade. As the meeting progressed, he could see their skepticism giving way to curiosity. Jason had never been more aware of what was on the line. This wasn't just an opportunity to save his business. It felt like a matter of honor. Back in the lobby, the TV still flickered, but it was now a distant echo in his mind. The storm outside, the weight of the world pressing down on him, fell away moment by moment. He wasn't powerless, he was a force that could shape his destiny. After what felt like hours, the meeting wrapped up and Jason left the room feeling lighter, more confident. The investors were interested, intrigued. They promised to follow up, to dig deeper into the truth behind the allegations. As he stepped back into the lobby, he looked up at the screen once more. It felt surreal. His face stared back at him, but this time it felt different. He no longer felt like a mere reflection of someone accused. Instead, he felt like a man ready to rise up, like an underdog who wouldn't back down. At that moment, he realized it was more than just a headline. It was a challenge. He had the opportunity to rewrite his narrative, to stand tall in the face of chaos. In the days that followed, he immersed himself in damage control. Emails flew back and forth, calls were made. Jason reached out to clients, vendors, anyone who could offer support or a helping hand. He told his story over and over again, meticulously explaining the truth. Each conversation was tough, but he found something powerful in standing up for himself. His narrative began to shift. When people heard him speak, they began to see the man behind the accusations. A week later, in a crowded room filled with potential partners, Jason stood confidently at the front. This time, he highlighted his vision, backed it up with facts and figures, and included testimonials from those who believed in him. It wasn't easy, but every moment felt like reclaiming a small piece of himself. As he closed with a strong statement about resilience and trust, he could see heads nodding in agreement. The room buzzed with energy, excitement, curiosity, respect. It felt electric. By the end of the presentation, he had answered every question and quelled every doubt. He felt like a phoenix rising from the ashes. Not only had he managed to navigate through the storm, but he had emerged stronger, more determined than ever. Days turned into weeks, and the accusations faded into the background. Jason found himself back in a comfortable rhythm, but there was a new fire in his heart. He learned to embrace his story, to own it. It was no longer the headline that defined him. It was how he had responded, how he had fought back. He reflected on the moment in that hotel lobby, the panic that threatened to take over. In confrontation lies opportunity, he realized. It was there in that chaotic moment that he had chosen to stand tall and speak his truth. Back in the lobby a few weeks later, this time it felt like coming full circle. He noticed how different it all seemed. The TV was off and the room was filled with laughter once again. His heart swelled, remembering the fear, but also the strength that had risen from it. He was no longer just Jason Reed, the entrepreneur. He was a survivor, a champion of his own story, someone who wouldn't let headlines define him. There would always be storms to weather, but he knew better now. He could embrace them, face them, and ultimately rise above. And as he stepped forward, filled with purpose, the world felt open and bright, ready for the next chapter. He stood in the back of the hotel lobby, just another face in a crowd filled with laughter and chatter. The air buzzed with anticipation as people gathered for an event that had brought them together, a tech conference promising fresh ideas and potential partnerships. But Jason couldn't shake the knot twisting in his stomach. Something terrible was brewing. He glanced at the large flat-screen TV broadcasting the news live from somewhere downtown. It flickered with the images of bustling city streets, but then it cut to a serious-looking anchor. His heart dropped, a cold wave of shock washing over him. Panic coursed through his veins as his mind raced, trying to grasp the weight of those words. Clients have accused him of deceit, the anchor continued. Jason felt an icy chill creep up his spine. This was not just an accusation, this was his life collapsing before him in real time. The lobby buzzed around him, yet he felt entirely alone. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone, but the screen felt strangely foreign in his grasp. How could he possibly explain this? The words investigation and fraud were playing like a haunting loop in his head. He had fought too hard, sacrificed too much. Was it all about to be stripped away in a matter of seconds? Around him, people were oblivious to his crumbling world. Couples strolled past, giggling over some inside joke. A group of executives were engrossed in a discussion about venture capital. But to Jason, everything felt like a fog, as if he were standing outside of his own life, watching it unravel. His mind spun back to the months of effort, the countless pitches, and the sleepless nights spent nurturing his startup. He was building something meaningful, wasn't he? A service to help small businesses thrive, not this, whatever this was. The thought twisted like a knife in his gut. "Mister," a voice called from behind. It was the hotel receptionist, her brow furrowed with concern. "I know," he breathed out, cutting her off, the urgency of the moment becoming unbearable. Her eyes softened. Hope, was that even in reach? In that moment, he couldn't afford to think about what might happen next. He had a presentation to deliver. It was the reason he was here, the culmination of everything he had worked for, his opportunity to showcase what he had built. He took a deep breath, willing himself to push through the chaos swirling inside. He entered the conference room. He glanced at the investors waiting for him. Their expressions were a mix of curiosity and apprehension. It struck him then, the weight of judgment heavy in the air. He thought, battling the rising anxiety. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, but his voice quivered, revealing his emotional turmoil. They looked at him, but did they see the same person they had met just weeks ago? The man filled with passion and ideas, or did they see the name now tagged to a scandal? One of them asked, breaking the silence. In that moment, time seemed to freeze. All eyes were on him, waiting for answers. He felt exposed, vulnerable like a deer in headlights. I know it looks bad, he stammered, feeling the pressure mounting. It feels like you're on trial, another investor interjected. With every second that ticked by, he could feel their doubts piling up like heavy stones. He struggled to find the words to articulate a truth that felt slippery and elusive. His life was unraveling, or at least his image was. Let me be clear, he said, finding a sliver of strength. This isn't who I am. I have worked tirelessly to build my company and serve my clients. For a moment, it felt like a cry in the dark, a desperate plea for understanding. Silence engulfed the room, but then he felt it, a tiny flicker of respect. It was as though the air shifted slightly, the breath held, tension released. I know this news raises questions, he continued, the anger finally beginning to seep into his voice, pushing back against the fear. But I want to fight this. With those words, Jason began to share his vision once more. He spoke of late nights and early mornings, of the clients he had helped and the dreams he strived to fulfill. His voice rose with increasing fervor as he painted a picture of his mission, a purpose that transcended one news headline. You could see their skepticism begin to waver. Questions returned, but they were different now. They were investing not just in a number, but in him, the man behind the vision. The meeting continued, fueled by a renewed energy. Jason could feel the narrative shifting. No longer just a man under scrutiny, he was a leader defending his mission, a fighter on his own behalf. Hours later, when he left the conference room, the weight of the world felt a little lighter. They had promised to look deeper, to hear his side of the story before making a judgment. Hope flickered back to life, fragile yet pulsating in his chest. Back in the lobby, the news was still on, but the weight of it had transformed into something manageable. He heard the TV anchor report, "The investigation is ongoing," a phrase that felt more like a challenge than an indictment. He had a way out, a path to walk, and he would not walk it alone. Days passed, and amidst the chaos, Jason immersed himself in work. He reached out to clients, vendors, and anyone willing to lend an ear. "This isn't just about me," he told them. It was a tough road, filled with difficult conversations. Some weren't willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. "We can't risk our reputation," one client said, the disappointment lacing his voice like a bitter aftertaste. Others stood firm. "We know who you are, Jason. Keep fighting," they urged, offering support in small, powerful ways. He began to find strength in his narrative, understanding that obstacles could be reframed as stepping stones. Each discussion became a rebuilding block, each show of faith a spark. As the whirlwind continued, he managed to secure a speaking engagement at a local entrepreneurial summit. "Facing adversity is part of the journey," he wrote in his materials. He wanted to show the world that he was more than headlines. He was a man of substance, undeniable in his resolve. On the day of the summit, he stood backstage, heart racing, ready to face another room full of strangers. When his name was announced, he stepped out onto the stage, the lights blinding for just a moment. It felt like looking into a new horizon. He took a deep breath, drawing in the energy of the crowd. "Today I want to talk about resilience and authenticity," he began. Each word resonated with what he had lived, what he had fought for. He felt the warmth of their attention, igniting the passion within him. For the first time since the news broke, he felt in control. He shared his story, his struggles, and how trust had transformed through authenticity and vulnerability. The audience was captivated, hanging on his every word. As he wrapped up, he felt a rush of exhilaration. Applause erupted, the sound dense and enveloping. Jason had turned a moment of despair into a source of inspiration, reshaping the narrative not just for himself, but for anyone who had faced challenges of their own. In the following weeks, he began to notice a shift. The news stories had started to fade into the background, replaced by journalism that focused on recovery and resilience. Jason Reed is rebuilding, some headlines read, and they carried a sense of hope rather than shame. He felt a surge of gratitude. Each moment on stage, each conversation had built a bridge back to trust. His clients returned one by one, their belief in him reaffirmed. He was no longer just a name tied to an accusation. He had become a symbol of tenacity in the face of adversity. Back at the hotel lobby months later, everything felt different. No longer burdened by shadows, he saw the place bustling with life once again. The TV no longer flickered with scandal. It had become a source of inspiration, showcasing achievements rather than failures. Jason's phone buzzed with messages of congratulations. His company was back on track, stronger than ever. Stepping away from the lobby noise, he took a moment for himself. He had fought hard to reclaim his narrative, to redefine who he was. He was not merely a victim of circumstance, but a testament to the power of resilience. Jason Reed had chosen to rise, transforming the weight of scandal into the fuel for a new beginning. With each step he took, the path felt solid beneath his feet, a path carved by truth, integrity, and an unyielding spirit. And as he stepped back into the world, he felt ready to embrace whatever came next. He stood in the back of the hotel lobby, a figure frozen in disbelief as the news banner scrolled across the screen. Jason felt as if the world had paused just for him, accountable only to the heavy weight of the moment. Local entrepreneur Jason Reed under investigation for fraud, it read. The words burned into his mind like a brand, igniting a wave of panic that surged through him. Around him, the lobby buzzed with activity. Business people chatted over coffee, laughter echoed from groups mingling by the bar, but all he could see was the glaring headline drenching him in shame. The warmth of the atmosphere felt like a cruel joke. How could the lively chatter continue while he was in the eye of the storm? His hands trembled as he fished his phone from his pocket. Notifications flooded his screen texts from friends, colleagues, even family. Each ping felt like a dagger driving deeper into the pit of his stomach. He recalled the months of grinding work building his startup, late nights spent drafting plans and strategizing over cups of burnt coffee. So many people had counted on him, his clients, his team, his family. How could this be happening now? Desperation clawed at him. This can't be real, he whispered to himself. But the news flash screamed otherwise. For a moment he considered fleeing, skipping his meeting entirely. But deep down he knew that wasn't an option. The stakes were too high. Every second felt like an eternity as he forced himself to breathe. He caught a glimpse of his reflection in a nearby glass panel, a man on the brink, eyes wide, mind racing. What would he say when he faced the investors? Would they judge him before even hearing his side? Panic settled like a lead weight in his chest. A voice broke through his thoughts. Mister, it was the hotel receptionist, her brow furrowed in concern. A kindly face one he had seen many times before, yet right now it felt like cruel irony. I just saw the news, he admitted, each word like a stone dropped into a well of uncertainty. I'm sure it'll sort itself out, she offered, hope lacing her voice, but doubt clung to him, a heavy fog clouding his thoughts. Could he really show up at the meeting and pitch his dream while the world painted him as a villain? With a determined shake of his head, he turned away from her gaze, summoning whatever courage he had left. I can't let this define me, he whispered to himself, each breath steadying him just a little more. He had come too far to let a headline drag him down now. As he strode into the conference room, the air felt electric. The investors were seated around a sleek table, looking at him with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Would they see the ambitious entrepreneur they once knew, or the tarnished man headlines had portrayed? Good afternoon, he started, his voice steady but taut like a bowstring pulled too tight. Silence draped over the room. They were waiting for him to explain, to justify his existence. One investor asked, a hint of disbelief lacing his tone. Jason nodded, feeling the weight of their collective eyes pressing down on him. I know it looks bad, I know people are saying things, he began, his thoughts racing. But I'm here to tell you that those allegations are unfounded. Suddenly, the silence felt electric. Jason sensed the doubt lingering in the air, thick and doubt-filled. He took a deep breath, stalling time for just a moment. This company is built on trust in our product, trust with our clients, trust in me. As he spoke, he could see them shifting in their seats, igniting something within him. He shared his vision passionately, recounting stories of clients whose businesses had thrived thanks to his work. With each story he wove in his unwavering dedication, his sleepless nights fueled by a belief that what he had created would change lives. He could feel the tension in the room begin to ease. Questions emerged, not just about the allegations, but about the future. Another investor asked, their voice less skeptical than before. Jason met their eyes, thankful for the shift. I'm gathering information, building my case, and reaching out to those I've worked with. Time began to fly, and as the conversation continued, he felt the doubt slip away. Instead of accusations, there was curiosity, interest. They were engaging with him again, wanting to understand the man behind the headlines. As he wrapped up, a glimmer of hope blossomed in his heart. They had promised to do their due diligence before passing judgment, to look at the facts instead of sensational headlines. With a sigh of relief, he stepped out of the conference room, feeling lighter for the first time since it all began. Days turned into weeks, and the chaos of the investigation began to swirl around him like a storm. But amid it all, Jason found a renewed determination. Dug deeper into his work, reaching out to clients, sharing his side of the story. Each conversation built his confidence, reassuring him that he wouldn't face this alone. He craved honesty, and to his surprise, most listened intently. Some even stepped forward, willing to vouch for him, to speak out against the swirling accusations. The tide began to turn, and with it, the narrative. He learned to embrace vulnerability, to share the reality that he was just a person trying to do good in the world. Trying to serve people, not hinder them. Every message received, every conversation held, each one solidified that he was not defined by a headline. The stories continued to grow, and as Jason prepared for an entrepreneurial summit, he refined his narrative. He understood that he had faced adversity and not cowered in its shadow. The challenge had become part of who he was now, a powerful piece of the puzzle he was assembling. The day of the summit arrived, and Jason stood backstage, feeling the familiar rush of nerves. Would they see him as the man he was working to become, or the man they saw on that TV screen? When he stepped onto the stage, the lights momentarily blinded him. He took a deep breath and pulled from the strength deep within. Today I want to talk about resilience, truth, and the journey of transformation, he began. As he spoke about the power of vulnerability, investors began to lean in, their expressions shifting from skepticism to intrigue. He could see their eyes light up with understanding, connecting with the story he deftly unfolded. He was reclaiming his narrative before their eyes. When he finished, he looked out at the audience and saw what he had hoped for: approval, respect, and perhaps even admiration. The warmth of applause surrounded him like a blanket, and for the first time, the shadows of doubt began to fade away. Weeks rolled by, and the storm that had threatened his career had turned into a soft rain, washing away the fears. Headlines began to shift, now celebrating his journey, highlighting stories of perseverance rather than dwelling on the darkness. Jason found himself deeply grateful for the lessons learned during that tumultuous time. He had not only fought for his company, but had discovered the strength within himself to overcome, to advocate for truth, and to show resilience against adversity. As he returned to the familiar hotel lobby, now filled with light and laughter, he felt a wave of nostalgia. The same screen that had once displayed an accusation now flashed with success stories from emerging entrepreneurs, journeys filled with struggles and victories. His phone buzzed with messages: good news, partnerships renewed, and a burgeoning client list. Each ping was a reminder that he had emerged from the storm stronger, ready to face whatever came next. He stood for a moment, absorbing it all, reflecting on how far he had come. The fear that once gripped him felt like a distant memory, replaced by something more powerful, a belief that he could withstand anything life threw his way. In that hotel lobby, he felt ready for a new beginning. Chance to rebuild not just his company, but the narrative of who he was. He had learned that he was not just a title on a news report. He was Jason Reed, a fighter brimming with resilience, and he was determined to write his own story, one filled with hope, strength, and unwavering courage. He stood in the back of the hotel lobby, clutching a steaming cup of coffee like it was a lifeline. The air was thick with excitement as entrepreneurs mingled and shared ideas, their laughter resonating throughout the space. But in that instant, all he could focus on was the large TV mounted on the wall, broadcasting the morning news. When the anchor's voice cut through the buzz, it felt like a roar in a silent room. His heart dropped. It felt like the floor had fallen away beneath him. How could this happen? The words echoed in his mind, drowning out the ambient chatter. A sinking feeling settled in his stomach as the screen displayed his face, surrounded by sensational headlines. Accusations arise. In that moment, time froze. Jason was acutely aware of the people milling around him, an oblivious crowd enjoying their morning, not knowing that the very man they admired was now the subject of a scandal. Could they feel the dread radiating off him? Could they see the bruises his soul was suffering? He glanced at the people near the coffee station who were scrolling through their phones, laughing over something that felt impossibly distant from the nightmare unfolding before him. His hands trembled and he forced himself to take a deep breath, trying to ground himself in a reality that felt surreal. Jason recalled the countless hours he had poured into his startup, nights spent perfecting his pitch, days filled with meetings, and the hope that what he was building would change lives. This company was his dream, a blend of passion and purpose, and now it felt like it was all slipping away in one cruel broadcast. "Mister," the voice of the hotel receptionist broke through his thoughts. She looked concerned, her eyes wide with pity. "I just saw the news. I'm fine," he stammered, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. He turned away abruptly, the pit in his stomach deepening. To hide behind a mask was one thing, but to pretend he was okay felt impossible. As he walked toward the conference room where his meeting awaited, his footsteps felt heavy. The knot in his stomach twisted tighter with each step. What would he say? Would the investors see him as the ambitious entrepreneur they once knew, or as the figure now tainted by scandal? The thought made him want to turn around to escape the reality that seemed to be closing in. The meeting room door swung open, and Jason stepped inside, met by the expectant stares of several serious faces. The investors were seated around a sleek, polished table, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. He sensed they were already questioning whether his name should carry weight in this room. "Good afternoon," he managed, but the words felt hollow, an echo of the energy that used to fill him. As he waited for their responses, a voice broke the silence. One of them asked, eyebrow raised, disbelief hanging in the air. "I have," Jason replied, the weight of the truth pressing down on his chest. He could feel their eyes scrutinizing him, dissecting him. "But I need you to hear me," he continued, his voice gaining strength even as the tremor of fear lingered. "The allegations are untrue. I've dedicated my life to building my company and serving my clients." As the words left his mouth, he could see small glimmers of interest shift in their expressions. Their skepticism was still there, but perhaps there was a desire for more than just sensational headlines. "People make mistakes. Accusations can come from anywhere," he said, feeling the impulse to defend himself. A tense silence hung in the air. Jason was desperately searching for understanding. "I refuse to let this moment define me. I want to prove myself to you," he added, conviction hardening his voice. Each inquiry felt like a wave washing over him, and somehow he started to feel like he was swimming rather than sinking. "I'm reaching out to all my clients, gathering information," he explained, his heart racing. "I won't fight this battle alone. I built a support system and I'm ready to defend my work." The atmosphere shifted again and the tension eased slightly as they exchanged glances. One investor asked directly, leaning forward, curiosity piqued. "Because my vision hasn't changed," Jason responded, his voice firm. "What I'm building is important. There's still a place for it in the market." Time slipped away as he continued to share how his startup had already brought tangible change to small businesses, how they had transformed under his guidance. With each story, he painted a picture filled with hope, determination, and a commitment to integrity. When he finished, the investors seemed different. They were not just looking at a man accused, they were looking at someone trying to fight for his purpose. Jason felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. After a tense back and forth, they agreed to reconsider based on his willingness to provide transparency. The meeting wrapped with a promise to keep the dialogue open, and Jason walked out of that room feeling lighter, the load on his shoulders easing ever so slightly. In the days that followed, he turned his focus to damage control. He rolled up his sleeves and reached out to clients, friends, and mentors. "This isn't just about me," he told them during calls. One by one, his voice resonated. Clients he had worked tirelessly for stood by him. "We know who you are, Jason," one client said. Those words were like fuel to his fire, igniting a spirit of resilience he hadn't realized was hidden away. But it wasn't always easy. Some clients backed away, the fear of association too great for them. Their hesitance stung, a vivid reminder that reputations could be fragile. Then came the summit, an entrepreneurial gathering where Jason could showcase his work. It was his chance to reclaim his narrative, to stand in front of a crowd and announce that he would not be defined by a headline. "I have to do this," he told himself, staring in the mirror as he practiced his speech. The day of the summit arrived, the energy palpable as attendees buzzed around the venue, sharing passion-fueled conversations. But standing backstage, the nerves kicked in, twisting his stomach into knots. Would they hear him, or would they see only the accusations swirling in the media? When he stepped onto that stage, he was met with bright lights and countless eyes trained on him. For a brief moment, he was engulfed in a wave of adrenaline. Then he took a deep breath and began. "Today I want to share a story, not just my story, but a story of resilience, honesty, and the importance of fighting for what you believe in," he said, feeling the truth flow through him. He spoke of the fear he felt on that fateful day in the lobby of being reduced to a headline, but more importantly, he addressed what it meant to rise from that fear. Each word was infused with the tension of his journey, the lows, the highs, the unwavering belief that true character shines through adversity. The room was silent, hanging on every word. He shared victories, small business owners who transformed their lives with his help, a community that grew stronger by working together. The energy in the room shifted. People were leaning in, captivated by his authenticity. When his speech concluded, the applause erupted around him, filling every corner of the space. There was warmth, validation, and perhaps even respect for not just the struggle, but the spirit of resilience. In that moment, he wasn't just Jason Reed, he was a testament to triumph. As weeks turned into months, the storm of allegations gradually faded. The headlines shifted, moved on to other stories, and Jason found renewed strength in his work. Each day was a chance to rebuild both his company and his reputation, and he embraced it wholeheartedly. He wasn't just putting out fires, he was growing. The clients who stood by him were blossoming, and his reputation began to rebound, each positive interaction carving back the stigma of the accusations. Back at the hotel lobby, the bustling life pulsed with energy, laughter spilling from every corner. The TV was now showcasing inspiring stories about entrepreneurs who had risen from their own struggles. Jason stood there, a proud smile spreading across his face. He had come full circle. Not only had he fought to reclaim his lost narrative, but he had turned it into something powerful. He remembered the weight of shame, the moments he had doubted himself, but then there were the moments filled with support, hope, and newfound purpose. As Jason walked away from that lobby, he felt the surge of life within him. He was ready to move forward, eager to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead. He was not just a name associated with scandal, but a fighter who had taken his truth and transformed it into resilience. With each step, he was no longer just a part of the story. He was the author, determined to write a future filled with strength, integrity, and unyielding hope. He stood in the back of the hotel lobby, his heart pounding as if trying to escape his chest. The bright overhead lights felt almost blinding, illuminating not just the polished marble floor, but the panic that was slowly creeping into his mind. Jason couldn't shake the dread that clung to him like a shadow. It was a day like any other until the large TV on the wall flickered to life, and in an instant his world changed forever. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Time seemed to freeze as the news anchor's voice cut through the lively atmosphere, slicing through laughter and conversation. He felt his legs weaken, and for a moment the noise faded away, replaced by the thud of his heartbeat echoing in his ears. His eyes locked onto the screen, where his face appeared alongside headlines that seemed to scream accusations. Clients outraged. The colors of the screen almost felt like they were swirling, twisting along with his stomach. This was no ordinary day. It felt like a nightmare unfolding live. Around him, people went about their day, oblivious to the turmoil raging inside him. A group of executives chuckled over coffee, unaware that just a few feet away, Jason was crumbling. He could already imagine the conversations, the whispers behind closed doors. How could this happen to him? He had poured everything into his startup, sleepless nights, countless sacrifices, and all for what? To have it all potentially wiped away in a matter of seconds. His hands shook as he reached for his phone, feeling the weight of his reality crush down on him. Notifications flooded the screen, messages from friends and colleagues, each one a reminder of the headlines that now followed him like a dark cloud. He hesitated, unsure if he wanted to read them. What could anyone say? Or worse, dismissing him entirely. Just breathe, he muttered to himself, gripping the coffee cup tightly as if it could ground him in this chaotic moment. He glanced at the receptionist, whose eyes were filled with concern, and then quickly back at the TV. The news anchor was still talking, detailing accusations that cut deeper than he cared to admit. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. He couldn't tear his eyes away, but he wished desperately that he could. He thought he had a meeting in less than an hour with investors who had believed in his vision. Would they see him as the innovative thinker he had worked so hard to portray, or the fraud the world had labeled him? Desperation surged through him. He couldn't let this ruin everything. He turned away from the screen, feeling the uncertainty rattle in his chest. One step after another, he forced himself toward the conference room, every step feeling like it might be his last. With each footfall, doubts crept into his mind, whispering harshly about the stigma of failure and the risk of walking into that room. As he entered, the atmosphere felt like a taut string ready to snap. Investors, poised and serious, looked up from their tablets. The power dynamics shifted when they saw him, their expressions transformed from curious to apprehensive. What would they think? Would they cling to those accusations, or would they hear his truth? "Good afternoon, everyone," Jason managed to say, though he could hear the unsteadiness in his voice. A few nodded, but many were waiting for him to explain, to justify the whirlwind that had just engulfed his life. One investor leaned forward, arms crossed. "Jason, do you have any idea what's going on?" "Yes," he replied, leveling his gaze with theirs, feeling the heat of their scrutiny. "I understand it looks bad, but I'm here to tell you that these allegations are completely unfounded." He paused, the silence pressing in on him like a weight. Would they believe him? Would they dismiss him? He fought back the rising tide of fear and pressed on. "What I've created is real." With each word, he could feel the energy in the room shift slightly from skepticism to curiosity. Questions began to surface, layered with the tension of uncertainty. Someone asked. Jason met their gaze, willing himself to exude confidence. "I'm gathering every document, every email, every contract. I want full transparency." The investors lined in, their attention sharpening. In that crucible of doubt, Jason found his purpose. He wasn't just defending himself. He was standing tall for everyone who believed in him. He recounted success stories, client testimonials, and groundbreaking work that brought lives back to productivity. As he revealed his vision, the tide of conversation began to swell from the storm of scrutiny to a surge of renewed interest. They were listening, engaging. "If you can show us the facts, we would be willing to reconsider," one investor said with a nod. When the meeting wrapped up, Jason felt a rush of relief wash over him. They had not shut him down. Instead, they promised to look deeper, to trust but verify. As he stepped out of that room, the burdens he carried felt just a little lighter. In the following days, the whirlwind of uncertainty morphed into a renewed sense of purpose. He immersed himself in damage control, gathering documentation and reaching out to clients. "I want to assure you," he told each one. Responses came rapidly, some supportive, others reticent. "I believe in you, Jason," one long-standing client said, backing him up publicly. But there were naysayers lurking in the shadows, unwilling to risk their own reputations by associating with someone accused of wrongdoing. Their doubts clawed at him, but he pushed through. Jason found solace in those who stood by him, using their support as motivation to gather resources and prepare for the next chapter. He spent countless hours revising his strategy, fortifying the foundation of his business. He knew the stakes were high, and it was time to show the world who he really was. Then came the entrepreneurial summit he had been preparing for since before the scandal broke. This was a chance to reclaim his narrative, an opportunity to speak not only about his company, but about resilience in the face of adversity. Standing backstage, he felt the weight of expectation. Would this be his chance to rise from the ashes? He took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage, facing a sea of eager faces waiting to hear from him. "Today I want to talk about more than just my business," he began, feeling the energy pulse through the room. He spoke passionately about the transformations he had witnessed in his clients' lives, weaving success stories into a narrative of hope. With each word, he saw the audience shift from skepticism to connection, their eyes lighting up with understanding. As he wrapped up, the audience erupted into applause, their cheers echoing like a heartbeat across the hall. Jason had turned a moment of despair into an anthem of triumph. He felt revitalized, his spirit soaring higher than the clouds that once threatened to rain down on him. In the weeks that followed, the headlines shifted, moving away from accusations to focus on his resilience. He had transformed not just his narrative, but the conversations around it. People began to see him as not just a man under investigation, but as someone who had fought against the odds. Back in that hotel lobby, the atmosphere felt vibrant again. The TV was now sharing stories of entrepreneurs rising from personal challenges, and he couldn't help but smile. He knew what it meant to stand in front of the storms, to embrace uncertainty and make it an opportunity for growth. Each notification on his phone filled him with renewed excitement, partnerships reestablished, new clients signing on. With every success, he felt more like the man he had always wanted to be. The clouds of scandal had faded, but the lessons remained etched in his heart. As he stepped out into the sunlit streets, Jason felt the world open up before him. He was ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead, confident that he could convert them into stepping stones. Instead of being defined by a headline, he was defining himself by the story he wanted to tell. With each step, he carried with him the belief that resilience is a journey, and he was just getting started. Jason Reed was not just emerging from the shadows. He was stepping into the light, ready to write new chapters filled with strength, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to his dreams. He stood in the back of the crowded hotel lobby, his coffee trembling in his hand as he watched the large flat-screen TV mounted high on the wall. The bright colors flickered like an ominous beacon, and his stomach twisted in knots. He had come here to network, to make connections that might elevate his startup, but now the world outside his mind was rapidly spiraling into chaos. The words echoed through his mind as he stared at the screen, feeling as though the earth shifted beneath him. Time stood still. Shock surged through him like a coursing river, drowning out the laughter and excitement around him, drowning out everything that once felt normal. His heart raced, pounding in his chest like a drum heralding doom. Accusations from several clients claim misrepresentation, said the news anchor, her voice steady and chilling. Jason felt himself sway, as if the very ground was eroding away beneath the weight of those accusations. The joy that filled the lobby morphed into a distant, mocking echo. Around him, the crowd remained animated, unaware of the storm brewing within him. Professionals chatted, exchanged business cards, and clinked glasses filled with bright, bold cocktails. Here he was, a man marked by a headline, yet they carried on as though nothing was wrong. He whispered to himself, each syllable coated in layers of disbelief and fear. His mind raced back over the months he'd spent cultivating his dreams. He had sacrificed friendships, lost sleep, and poured his savings into this venture. A wave of anger rose, hot and electric. How could someone distort his hard work into something ugly? Frantically, he pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers shaking as he scrolled through messages. Each notification felt like a knife twisting deeper, reminding him of how quickly everything could unravel. "Get a grip, Jason," he muttered, forcing himself to breathe. His reflection in the glass doors showed a man with wild eyes, hair slightly disheveled, standing on the edge of a precipice. He needed to act. He had a meeting with investors in less than an hour. Would they see the man who had presented them with ideas that could change lives, or see only the figure now marred by scandal? He pushed through the doubt, threading his way toward the conference room, each step heavier than the last as whispers of judgment trailed behind him. As he entered the room, Jason felt the weight of countless eyes press against him like a suffocating blanket. The investors were seated around a glossy conference table, their faces adorned with expressions that ranged from skepticism to pity. A knot tightened in his throat. How had things come to this? "Good afternoon," he said, his voice unexpectedly steady, but it barely skimmed the surface of his racing thoughts. He scanned the room, taking in their tense faces, all questioning, all expectant. One investor finally asked, eyebrows furrowed, arms crossed. "Yes, I know," he stammered, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on his chest, "but I need you to hear me out." Silence enveloped the room, thick enough to slice through. He swallowed hard, summoning every ounce of courage he could find. "These accusations are unfounded." Another investor leaned forward, skepticism etched into her features. "But how do you explain the outraged clients, Jason?" His heart raced as panic began to claw its way back in. "I want to prove myself to you. I'm gathering evidence, reaching out to my clients for their testimonials." He knew he had to frame the narrative correctly, to regain control over the story that was spiraling out of his hands. "Prove it," the investor countered, and he could feel the tension crackling in the air. Jason took a deep breath, grounding himself in the truth. "I will show you every interaction, every transaction that highlights our dedication to honesty and service. I won't let this define me or our company." Slowly, he began sharing stories of his clients, the successes they had achieved together, and the trust he had forged over time. Each success story felt like a piece of armor defending him against the accusations. The investors leaned in, drawn to the passion and resolve that colored his words. Jason felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. He could see his narrative shifting. For the first time in days, he wasn't just defending himself, he was advocating for his vision, and they were starting to listen. I plan to launch a campaign to rebuild trust with our clients. Engagement, transparency, and integrity will be our pillars as we move forward. The atmosphere changed again, shifting from judgment to curiosity. Questions flowed back and forth, igniting a debate over strategy and recovery. They were no longer spectators, they were engaged in discussions about what he could do next. And Jason felt himself relaxing piece by piece. When the meeting wrapped up, some investors nodded thoughtfully, promising to review his proposals once he gathered the necessary evidence. Stepping out of that room, he felt lighter, a small flicker of hope illuminating the heavy clouds that had loomed over him. The following days passed in a blur of sleepless nights and fervent strategizing. Jason was relentless, reaching out to clients old and new, amassing testimonials, evidence, and goodwill. "We have always been transparent," he told them. Responses varied. Some clients rallied behind him, their encouraging messages fueling his fire. "We know you, Jason." Others, they were not so forgiving. The rejection stung like a slap across the face, but he had to push through to transform the hurt into determination. Every setback reinforced his beliefs. He had to stand for integrity. He had to rise above this storm. Then the day of the entrepreneurial summit arrived, a chance to reclaim his narrative. It filled him with equal parts dread and determination as he stood backstage, wrestling with a blend of anxiety and excitement. This was the moment where he could take back control and show the world who he truly was. As he stepped onto the stage, the glare of the lights momentarily blinded him, silencing everything but the beat of his heart. The audience's faces shifted in and out of focus. He took a deep breath, summoning every bit of strength within him. "Today I want to talk about resilience," he began, his voice echoing through the auditorium. He spoke about the recent storm of accusations, the fight to preserve his vision, and the support he received from loyal clients. With each word, he worked to turn his turmoil into a powerful story of growth and determination. He could see heads nodding in the audience, their interest growing as he shared vulnerability intertwined with triumph. "I refuse to let fear dictate my path," he continued. "Instead, I choose to face my challenges head-on." As he concluded, the applause erupted, a thundering affirmation that brought tears to his eyes. In that moment, Jason realized something profound. He had become more than just a name attached to scandal. He had become a voice of resilience. Weeks passed, and the storm that had threatened to consume him faded into whispers. Headlines shifted, replaced with stories celebrating his journey of rebuilding. Clients shifted back to his side, rekindling partnerships and believing in him again. Back at the hotel lobby, Jason felt the atmosphere beaming with life. The TV was now highlighting stories of entrepreneurs emerging from their own struggles, celebrating triumphs over adversity. As he stood there, he felt a sense of belonging, a part of a larger narrative that welcomed resilience and growth. His phone buzzed with notifications, new clients eager to work with him, partnerships reaffirmed. Each message was a reminder of how far he had come and how he had battled through the storm with courage and integrity. Stepping outside into the sun, Jason could feel the warmth envelop him like a gentle embrace. He was in control of his story, ready to take on whatever challenges awaited. The shadows had fallen behind him, replaced by a bright horizon. As he walked forward, he knew this journey was just beginning. He was not just a businessman, nor merely a survivor of scandal. He was a champion of resilience. And with each step, he'd continue to define his own narrative, one that intertwined hope, strength, and an unwavering commitment to leave a mark on the world. He stood in the back of the hotel lobby, a thick, cold fog of uncertainty wrapping around him. The bright fluorescent lights above were almost blinding, illuminating faces full of excitement and anticipation, chatting effortlessly about dreams and deal-making. But all he could focus on was the large TV mounted on the wall, broadcasting the morning news. The familiar anchor's voice soared through the air, slicing right through the buzz. His heart sank like a stone thrown into a dark river. Panic gripped him, and he felt as if the ground had fallen out from under him. Time slowed, the laughter and animated conversations blurred into an echoing hum, leaving only the sharpness of the moment behind. There he was, his face emblazoned on the screen, accompanied by headlines that screamed betrayal. Clients outraged, the anchor said, her tone heavy with authority. In an instant, the very fabric of his life unraveled. Months of hard work, sleepless nights, and dreams forged in the fires of relentless ambition hung in the balance. Jason's hands trembled as he reached for his phone, feeling as if it held the power to either condemn or rescue him. The notifications flooded in not support but shock and questions. Each message felt like another punch, another reminder that he was being watched, that he had fallen from grace in the blink of an eye. He glanced around the lobby, searching for anyone whose eyes would reflect a hint of understanding. But the professionals around him continued their conversations, completely unaware of the turmoil rumbling in his chest. He thought, "Mister," a voice broke through his haze. It was the hotel receptionist, her eyebrows knitted with concern. "I just saw the news." I'm fine," he lied, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. Deep down, a storm roared, pulling him into its depths. He couldn't afford to wallow in despair. He had a meeting to attend, investors waiting to hear his pitch. The thought of their judgment brought a fresh wave of nausea. What if they believed the news? What if they saw him as a con artist? Clenching his teeth, Jason willed himself forward, each step carrying the weight of 1,000 doubts. He crossed the marble floor, his shoes echoing sharply with each footfall. It felt like an endless distance right into the jaws of uncertainty. He reached the conference room door, taking a moment to steady his breathing. His hand hovered over the doorknob, nerves tightening in his gut. What would await him on the other side? Would they see the determined entrepreneur they had once admired, or the fraud the news had now created? He turned the knob and stepped inside. The atmosphere shifted immediately, a tight coil of expectation coiling around him. The investors were seated around a modern, polished table, their faces a canvas of various shades of concern and curiosity. Jason felt exposed, standing under their scrutinizing gazes, a lone figure on trial. "Good afternoon," he managed to say, though his voice wobbled slightly. Silence hung thick in the air, every moment stretching longer than the last. Then finally an investor broke it. "Yes, I know," he replied, drawing a deep breath, mustering every ounce of courage he had left. The heaviness of their stares felt paralyzing. He fought against the tide of panic rising up within him. "I've dedicated my life, my heart and soul to this company." There was a flicker of interest, a tilt of heads, a spark of curiosity. The air crackled with energy, and Jason seized the moment. "These accusations are unfounded. I want to prove to you that everything I built is grounded in integrity," he continued, his voice gaining strength. As he spoke, he could feel the tension change. He shared stories of clients who had found success through his investment. He recounted late nights spent honing his vision, answering each of their questions with unwavering confidence. Slowly, the atmosphere in the room transformed, shifts from skepticism to intrigue. But then, out of nowhere, another investor interrupted him. "But how do we know this isn't just a cover-up?" Jason's heart pounded louder than ever, each beat echoing in his ears. "I can provide everything: contracts, emails, client testimonials. I'll show you proof that our work is rooted in transparency and honesty." Their expressions softened, and for the first time a flicker of hope ignited in his chest. Maybe he could turn this around. Each question felt like a door opening, allowing him to step further into the light. "Name one thing we can do to help you rebuild your image," one of the investors asked, sincerity creeping into his tone. "I plan to launch a transparent outreach campaign to reconnect with our clients. I want to assure them of our commitment to integrity and their trust," Jason explained, feeling the rising energy lift him. "Fine," the initial skeptical investor said, sitting back, weighing his options. "But this better not be smoke and mirrors." When the meeting ended, Jason walked out of that room feeling a rush of relief, as if he had just escaped a whirlwind. The tension in his muscles began to dissolve, and while whispers still echoed, a small flame of hope flickered in his heart. The following days were filled with relentless effort. He reached out to every client he could think of, presenting his side of the story and urging them to back him. It became a whirlwind of effort. "We know you're better than the news says," came a message from one longtime partner. Others, however, were not so forgiving. "We can't risk our reputation on unproven claims," said one email. Each rejection stung deeper than he anticipated, but he refused to let despair sink in. Jason's journey turned into a relentless pursuit, not just for his business, but to reclaim his very identity. He worked late into the nights, crafting campaign strategies, reaching out to media outlets, crafting a story that would resonate with the public and drown out the negativity. Then an enormous breakthrough arrived. He was invited to speak at an entrepreneurial summit, a chance to present his vision and resilience to the world. It felt like a lifeline. This was the moment he could reclaim his narrative, show everyone he was not just a name associated with scandal. Standing backstage on the day of the summit, Jason felt a potent mix of fear and excitement. Would they see him as the man he had always been, or would they only see the negative headlines? He took a deep breath, preparing himself as the MC called out his name. As he stepped onto the stage, the lights momentarily blinded him. The crowd swelled in front of him, a sea of faces eager for inspiration, and he felt the pulse of anticipation thrumming through the air. "Today I want to share a story not just about my business, but about resilience and rising above adversity," he began, his voice steadying. He shared the personal trials he had faced, the humbling experience of watching everything he built come under threat. He spoke with raw honesty about the feelings of fear and vulnerability, but more importantly about the strength that arose from those moments. As he spoke, his passion ignited a spark in the audience. "Sometimes when you're on the brink, that's when you find your true self," he thought, feeling alive on that stage. "We cannot let fear stop us. We must embrace it to fuel our journey," he declared, lifting his chin and making eye contact with every single person in the crowd. As he wrapped up, the applause erupted like thunder through the hall, enveloping him in a wave of validation. In that moment, it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had ever faced adversity. He had shared a piece of his soul, and they had received it with open hearts, but then came the fallout. After the summit, smartphones buzzed with gossip. Social media lit up, and soon enough, the whispers around him turned into shadows whispering doubts. Then the inevitable happened. A controversial article surfaced just hours later, questioning everything he had just conveyed on stage. The article questioned, planting seeds of doubt. In an instant, the applause faded in his recollection, swept away by the renewed cloud of suspicion hanging over him. As he read the words that painted him once again as a manipulative figure, the warmth from the spotlight dimmed, replaced by cold despair. As Jason stood in that crowded hotel lobby days later, a weight heavy in his chest, the TV shook with news of protests from disgruntled clients' angry voices demanding justice, calling for accountability. The laughter and excitement in the room felt like a distant memory, a world he could no longer touch. Once again, he found himself at a crossroads, uncertain of his next step. Would he have the strength to push through yet another storm? Would he drown in the very narrative he had fought so hard to reshape? The path was murkier than ever, and the stakes were higher than he ever imagined. As the screen flickered, Jason's reflection stared back at him. A fighter, yes, but also a man consumed by doubt. The room pulsed with life, yet all he felt was the sinking weight of what was to come, and in that moment, he knew the battle was far from over.